Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you tuned into the news this morning, you might have heard a little bit about the Committee on Climate Change's latest report and the gulf they describe between the level of aspiration that the government's talking about on climate change and the level of delivery that we're seeing so far. And we know that a big part of that picture relies on change in land use. So shifting our current emissions profile from land use being a net emitter to making sure that it starts to sequester carbon and helps us to deliver net zero. It's a big, big ask. If you're following the biodiversity debate, you might have been watching the debate on the Environment Bill this week, and you might know that environmentalists are calling on the government to halt the decline of biodiversity by 2030 as part of a global mission to bend the curve on nature's decline. And that is a huge mission as well. And so the message we wanted to give this afternoon and the views we wanted to hear from you are about how we can achieve that together. Because we know we're asking farmers to do something absolutely spectacular over the next 10 years. Being able to turn round that land use emissions profile to something that can achieve net zero is a huge ask. It is literally impossible at the moment to achieve net zero without farmers and land managers. And as for the biodiversity question, we rely even more on the people who manage 3/4 of our land to deliver that change in our relationship with nature to be able to achieve those targets. So as environmentalists, we're often pushing farmers to go further and faster and harder. But we know that the things that we care most about are impossible to deliver without you guys. So we're here this afternoon from Wildlife and Countryside Link. That's a coalition of 60 environmental groups. And we're here to discuss what we can learn from the history of farming, what we need to relearn about old ways of managing our land, and how we can combine that with a high-tech and forward-facing future of innovation so that farming can contribute towards these great environmental missions. And we believe that there's a huge amount that we can fight for together in getting the framework right from government to be able to deliver that. So we heard some of those in the Georgie Eustice discussion this morning. It will be impossible for farmers to step up to that huge mission unless we have the funding right to be able to pay farmers handsomely to take bold environmental steps. At the same time, we'll never have enough money to do that unless we're able to describe a new normal for farming that heads towards a more regenerative approach as standard, so that people are expected to be able to be paid handsomely on top of that new normal so that we can afford to achieve the changes we need. And finally, of course, we must work together to make sure that these domestic standards that we're asking for aren't undercut by exporting our environmental footprint and allowing cheaper and lower quality goods to come in from abroad. So these are the big questions for us. We think this is a spectacular mission that we're asking farmers to be part of, and we think we can take on some of those big regulatory challenges together to help governments get the framework right to help you achieve it. So I'm delighted to be joined by a brilliant panel this afternoon to think about that question, how we combine the best of the old and the new. What is it that when we take away that European regulatory framework, we need to relearn from old ways of doing things? And what is it that we need to set out in a future regulatory framework to help farmers innovate, improve, work with precision technologies and advanced information technology to help them describe a new future of advanced farming? So our panel is a distinguished one. We are joined by Christopher Price, who is Chief Executive of the Rare Breed Survival Trust and Vice Chairman of the Landscapes Alliance. Uplands Alliance. And we're joined by Georgie Bray, who is the Farm Manager at RSPB's Hope Farm, and by Martin Lyons, who is the Chief Executive of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And each is going to give a short introductory thought before we turn to discussion and questions from the audience. So thank you very much again for joining us. Please do get stuck in with questions and debate. We'd love to hear from you. And I'll turn first to Christopher.
Okay, thank you, Richard. These chairs are terribly low, I'm finding, but anyway. Okay, so... Okay, can we concentrate on the... We're talking about a new era for farming. So what's occasioned this new era? Well, I think there's basically two things. First of which is that we are leaving the EU, and that means leaving the CAP. And secondly, there is the growing realization of the seriousness of the climate and biodiversity challenges we face. I think it's worth spending a bit of time reflecting on what the function of the CAP was, because as that goes and we need to replace it, we need to think what it is we're trying to achieve. And I think it's important that we're not trying to get anything like a like-for-like replacement. The CAP was about food security. It was making sure that the people of Europe had enough healthy, nutritious food to eat, which is a laudable aim, but it's not the only aim, I would suggest, of policy. Also, query whether the way it went about it was the ideal way to do it. It largely tried to achieve food security by, first of all, paying farmers to produce. It then shifted to paying them basically to exist, to ensure that there were enough farmers across Europe producing food. All that is now going, and that's what gives us the new opportunities. It's important that as policy professionals and as officials, if there's any in the audience, that we do give some thought to what those interventions should be. But it's probably also worth reflecting on how much will change anyway as a result of leaving the CAP and systems changing. You know, as basic payment goes, then the money that paid for the subsidies that maintained what I think most of us would agree was a fairly damaging way of farming will also go. Farmers will need to go and look to lower input systems in particular. Now, for my example, in my own sector of livestock, it's not going to be economically viable to keep continental breeds which depend on really expensive inputs, quite significant vet and med bills, so people will have to start looking to do things differently. And to my mind, they will start keeping or revert to the native breeds that were bred to go and thrive in a British landscape, that can be kept outdoors on grass for most of the year and don't require the sort of costs. And if they can build on that with savvy marketing so that they're making more of the provenance of the low environmental footprint, that should increase the profit side as well. So it's a kind of a win-win just as a result of changing the basic system. But we're never going to achieve everything with that. We can't rely on the market entirely. And there's two areas where government does need to intervene, which I suspect is what the focus of our discussion will be about for the rest of the session. Firstly, now we're recognising the scale of the environmental and biodiversity crisis, we need significant government investment to help farmers address that. Farmers, as everyone in this room will know, have a huge role to play in this, but you can't expect them to do it for nothing. We don't expect other professionals to provide public benefits for free. Why do we expect farmers to do it? No, they need to be supported at a rate that makes it worth their while to do. We also need to recognise that for most farmers, farming isn't just about providing public benefits or even mainly about providing public benefits. It's about having a living. And there's some huge stuff that government needs to go and do to help farmers on that journey. And one of the things I found frustrating about George Eustice's presentation this morning was how little he touched on that. You know, for example, in the livestock sector, one of the biggest challenges we face is the lack of a network of abattoirs. Now, George Eustice was right to say there are lots of abattoirs. There are. The problem is they won't take small numbers of non-standard animals, by which I mean animals with big horns and thick skins, and nor will they return the fifth quarter, which is what a lot of farmers depend on to make the difference between profit and not making a profit. So it's not the number of abattoirs, it's the type of abattoirs. And I would argue that there is a good case for government to make some short-term investment to help abattoirs reposition towards the sort of systems that we're moving to. And there's other things. Honest labelling. You know, if we're expecting people to buy the right stuff, they need to know that it is the right stuff, and that if you claim your produce is something, that there is some sanction if it's not, which needs to be addressed. And there's just little regulations that could do with being changed. I'm assuming most of you aren't livestock farmers, but it is difficult to sell meat from an animal that is more than 30 months old. You can do it, but it's expensive. That means that a lot of our slower growing native breeds can't find markets because it's just not viable to go and do it. If we could change that one rule, it would unleash a whole range of other breeds, which are the sort of breeds which I think we need doing. So that's really what I want to say. A lot of good stuff I think will happen as a consequence of leaving the CAP, but not enough good things will happen. We need significant investment in the public goods that farmers can provide, and we need to do more to help farmers operate as businesses and see what regulations and support can be looked at, obviously without compromising standards at all, but what things can be done to liberalise the system a little bit and not just have rules because we need to have rules. And of course, all of this is more important in the light of the sort of thinking we're seeing underpinning the Australia trade deal. You know, we're not going to be able to go and maintain standards through protectionism. We need to go and maintain standards by incentivising farmers to come up to the right sort of standards. So that the case, I think, for public money for public goods is all the stronger as a result of last week's announcements on that front. And there you go. There's my contribution to get the debate rolling, with which I'll hand over to Georgie. And you, my Chancellor.
Thanks, Christopher. So Christopher's described how we've all agreed that it's a good thing that we've deconstructed some of those shackles that we experienced in the Common Agricultural Policy, which linked payments to ownership of land, and that we have an opportunity now to move towards something more positive. And the government's been saying all the right things about public money for public goods. We really support that. But the question is, what does that future look like? And what do we need to take from the old system to build up something better? And I hope that Georgie will be able to start to cast a light on that.
I hope so. Though, just to give a bit of a perspective on where we come from at Hope Farm as well, might give you an idea of why we've got the views we've got. So Hope Farm is 180 hectares in South Cambridgeshire, arable farmland, and we took it on 20 years ago to implement the Countryside Stewardship Scheme in a way that we felt was accessible to all other farmers. We stayed conventional. Just to see the difference that you could make for wildlife, recognising that huge decline, particularly in farmland birds, but also other species that rely and need farmland to survive. And that is just what we did for the first 15 years. We put in basic good wildflower margins, hedgerows, winter seed mixes, and those kind of things. And that made a huge difference. Breeding birds are up 200%, butterflies 400%, and winter birds numbers a scale of magnitude above that. But that still hasn't happened in current agriculture. We need, or on some farms it certainly has, but on the UK scale we are still seeing that steady decline in wildlife. So we've got current tools available to us to make that real difference, but we just need to drive that system change. Just putting funding there for things isn't enough to make a lot of the changes. We need to have that knowledge there, that availability for farmers to access the information, to know what to put where to best put winter seed mixes, where best to put wildflower margins and those kind of things, and how to manage them as well, because they do take a different skill set. These habitats as well at the moment in the stewardship schemes, they are very much siloed, they are very prescriptive, applicable to be applied in a very similar fashion across the whole of the UK. And that doesn't suit every farm system. The farmers we've got across the country, they know their land, they know how to manage it and get the best out of it for crops. And probably a lot of that is true if we give farmers the opportunity and say, look, this is the kind of habitats you want to create, and say, this is the product, go and make it, without giving opportunities to cut corners, but actually giving opportunities to get the best value for money out of this public money that is going into the new system. Similarly, with these prescriptive things that are available at the moment, you can have a wildflower margin next to a hedge. Both really good habitats, and when you put the two together, connect it across a farm and potentially across a whole landscape, you can make a huge difference. But if a hedge starts to encroach slightly on a margin, you'll get this really long, tusky vegetation, maybe a few blackthorn suckers coming up. That itself is a really valuable habitat, but farmers will currently get penalised for it, which makes no sense when it's actually that whole system of having the shelter, the pollinator resources, the berries, and the pollinator resources from the margin that all in all create the good farmland habitat. And it's looking at those multiple benefits of farmland as well. I've only talked about habitat provision so far, and it's in relative recent history that at Hope Farm we've been looking at the soil, the cover crops, making a difference for the whole farm and not just having these marginal habitats providing and doing good things around the edge. Similarly, there's a lot of things that need to happen so that farmers know what cover crops go right in the what cover crops are right for their soil, how best to establish, to terminate them, how to reduce the tillage as well. There are systems available at the moment for farmers to get funding, well, not now, but there has been, under greening, where farmers have been paid to put a very standard mix in that hasn't done its job. And as a lot of farmers have become more knowledgeable about what works best for their land, they're not actually including that area because it doesn't do the job it should do. So we should take those lessons and actually give the farmers the opportunity to do what works best for them. Another thing I have noticed is, again, going down that knowledge transfer for things like having multiple crops in a field. This conference, this show has been a really good example of the breadth of knowledge that we've got here, where I can go to speak to different farmers and find out how I can grow wheat with legumes, so I can reduce my nitrogen inputs on the farm, and so that we can work to reduce the carbon footprint of the farm and get further to net zero. But current mainstream knowledge on RB209 doesn't cater for that at all. If I want to find out how to grow wheat and how to provide the right nutrients for that, that's readily available. But as soon as you start mixing up these crops, it's really hard to get that right information, and that needs amending. There are a lot of things available, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to go in the right direction and take all farmers up to a really good baseline and then go much further than that. But yeah, there needs to be a lot of positive flexibility without getting corner cutting, and there needs to be a lot more opportunities available on a wide scale quite quickly.
Thanks, Georgie. Before we leave you, you talked about how Hope Farm has done such brilliant things in terms of increasing your numbers and how it hasn't yet permeated the farmed countryside. Do you think that what we're hearing from Defra at the moment is going to do that job of taking the kind of model that you describe and making it the new normal?
It is a bit of a concern at the moment that it is lacking in ambition and direction, and not necessarily the lack of ambition in what is going through in the SFI at the moment, but the lack of direction is a real danger for the farmers to not know how to plan, where we're going, and so what steps need to be taken in the next 5 or 10 years to get to that final destination.
Thank you. So that sort of vision of the future that we heard about from Mr. Eustice needs a bit more detail in it so that people can plan their businesses, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe Martin, who is Chief Exec of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, can do that job for Defra and describe for us something more of a concrete vision for what a new, more regenerative farming future looks like and the support that's needed to get there.
That'd be a big job to help Defra do all that. So as an arable farmer, I can use the latest technology, the GPS, the science and the information we have to reduce my impact on the environment, correct some of the damage we've done. By having the GPS and placing seeds and products just where we need them, not the overall broadcast, limiting what we do, and as we improve our soil health and using satellite information and soil sampling, tackling the problems we've caused in the past, and actually reduces my cost and only does the rectify the areas that we've caused problems with just where they need to, rather than do blanket application. We also need to use proper nature-based IPM, go back to have proper strong rotations of diversity and length of rotations, so there's that diversity of different crops we grow, and actually use the landscape to benefit our crop production, understanding that having areas of pollinators and predatory insects and bird life actually can benefit my production. It increases my pollination by having those insects, the predation of beetles and bugs that eat the pests I have. And as a farmer, I don't need to use insecticides anymore because I work with those free gifts nature gives us of wildlife and biodiversity. But it's really hard to understand as a farmer because my education has all been about production and output. I went to college, university, and within the industry magazines and other events we go to, it's been always about the output. And actually what I want to understand is, what wildlife do I need on my farm to reduce my costs? How can I use nature as free gifts it gives me to operate the landscape and which habitats do I need to have. So as a farmer, I want to work with wildlife organisations and have them on the farm and understand their science and their knowledge of what species we need to have, what should I have. I've normalised my thinking around the landscape I farm to being good. But you bring someone on about birds, bugs, bees and other things, they celebrate what we've got, then explain I should have a whole lot more. I normalise what I expect to see and think that's good. But I can do better, but I have a lot of good stuff. And how can we encourage other farmers to think like that, of thinking of using the whole landscape and using the biodiversity as their first tool of delivery and soil health improvements, and then add additional products only and as when needed. And I'm looking for the government to have a really set of strong standards, and I'm looking for this vision of where do they want us on this roadmap in the next 5 and 10 years of how they want us to deliver a landscape, and how our food production will get connected to the consumer and within local supply chains wherever possible, and how do we connect our consumers to that what we're doing on our landscape. And as farmers, we can be really proud of what we can deliver. We have had problems in the past, but that was the system that we were farming under. So don't blame the farmer, blame so much of the system and so much of past policy. And let's be proud farmers about showing what we could deliver in the future and get this framework, working with organisations to get the policy framework right, get the funding framework right through blending of private and public finance going forward. And how can we reconnect those public through their current taxation system, how that connects to how I'm going to get rewarded in the future and those private money. So we must reach out to the public and communicate where we are, the challenges we have, and where we can get to with the right framework to encourage the politicians to do more for us and to set that framework and that rule book for the future. And I say, as a farmer, I really need to understand where nature fits into my landscape, how I can achieve the good bits on my farm and connect to the wider landscape. As an individual business, I can't do everything, but working within a landscape scheme and understanding what we can do, and my role within that landscape to reduce the impact I have on my farming system, and I hopefully have a polluter pays principle. So those are causing the most harm in the future, will see the most inspections, and those that are trying to do the right thing have the softer touch. But we can have the supporting information and guidance by link organisations and the conservation bodies working together with farmers and demonstrating to Defra what we can do, and have farmers actually championing what we can do. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Martin. And sometimes when we think of the turning point we're at with agriculture, you get sort of two caricature visions, don't you? We can either go for a modern farming future that means vertical farming and things being grown in hydroponics bays and maybe intensification and gene editing and that sort of thing. And you get this sort of sci-fi future on the one hand, or you sometimes get the opposite. You get the sort of caricature of regenerative farming, which is that we're turning back the clock. We're going back to some sort of Arcadian idyll where there are 1,000 people working every hectare with no machinery and old-fashioned ways of doing things. But I think Martin's described how a combination of intelligent technology and learning again some of those lessons from the past can describe a new course that doesn't go down either of those routes. Is that right? Are those two possible futures myths, and is there a sort of sweet spot in between them?
Very much so, and that's the sweet spot for the profitability of our business, is how we blend that landscape approach of the best of the old and the best of the new that's coming, but use science carefully because it can take us down rabbit holes. And I think it's really exciting, the future we have coming before us.
And I was getting a sense from the panel that a key part about taking the lessons from the past was about advice and helping people on farm to remember maybe some of those things that they previously understood about working with nature, and that this role of on-farm advice is going to be crucial for that aspect of things. Do you think that the government's got it right at the moment about provision of advice? And if you could lay out a pathway for making sure that every farmer has access to the kind of advisory independent services that they need, what would that look like? Chris, maybe to start us off.
I'm not sure if the government's doing it right, because I'm not entirely sure what the government is doing. But I think there's a number of things that we can learn from the past. There's a huge amount of research that suggests that farmers best learn or are most willing to take advice from other farmers and similar trusted sources like the farming press. They will rely on those to a much greater extent than they rely on the person from the ministry. For those of you who were around during FMD 20 years ago, you might recall that afterwards the government paid ADAS, the then extension service, to go and do a report on every farm and give some advice on what they could do to pick themselves up after the horrors of FMD. And you would go to farmhouses afterwards, and there'd be some farmers who were doing brilliant stuff, finding lots of new ways to do things, and there were some farmers who were trying to go and carry on as before. But query whether the amount of money that was spent on ADAS reports had any impact on that at all. My very strong impression from back then was if you were the sort of go-getting entrepreneurial person, you would do it. If you weren't, you wouldn't. And what government did had no impact on any of that. It would have been much better to have given much more sort of targeted support. So I'm sceptical about the benefit of government-type advisors at all having any being trusted in this remit. Also, I think to a large extent there was I think a sense of following the money. Farmers are very good at learning what they need to do to make money. If the money is increasingly coming from public goods, whether provided through from the state by through ELM, or whether it's a sort of money that's being paid out by water companies to manage land in different ways. I think if that's where the money is, farmers will make sure they know how to get it. So I think we can overestimate the extent to which publicly funded advice is really going to be needed in the future.
One of the things that we often remark on from outside the industry is about that follow the money question and how much of advice comes from corporates with an interest in the products that they're trying to sell. I don't know, if, as not being a farmer, is that a problem, and should we be trying to make sure that the advice sector is as independent as it can be? And is having somebody from the RSPB or the Wildlife Trust likely to be met with more trust or a different kind of mistrust, Martin, when they come to your farm?
I want a diversity of information and trusted resources. Not one person gives me the whole answer. I get really concerned with hearing Sir Georgie Eustice keep referring to the agronomist on my farm. He's the person I almost least want to be listening to because I want to do things differently. They're good, and my one I'm working with is understanding, but it's about the old school, and I'm trying to go in the forward bit, and how do I get the wildlife information joined into that? So we need that diversity of information. I need the toolbox, and allow some of the farmers to just get on with it. Give us the framework, and then we can bring in resources in on that landscape recovery stuff, and we can do it individually or in clusters. So there's the opportunity of really making this work, but we need the framework and the government to set up the toolbox we need, some funding around clusters or some lead advisors in a landscape that we can bring in resource, but allow our businesses to go and bring in that stuff we need to do, because every single farm business across the UK is different, and we need that different advice to understand what we can do, where does our farm fit within the wider landscape, and what are the priorities for biodiversity recovery or water recovery where I am, and then we can get on with it.
Thank you. And before we turn to questions from the audience, I just want to look at what the best of the old and the new from the regulatory point of view. So it's very easy to cap bash and to imagine that we have to redesign everything from the bottom up now. But there is a lot of good experience out there from countryside stewardship and other agri-environment schemes in the past. And we need to make sure that Defra learns those lessons and remembers the good bits rather than just go for a blank slate. So if you had to give some advice, Georgie, about the key features of previous schemes that we want to retain on the regulatory side and on the payments side, alongside the key features that we want to innovate on, what would those be?
I think at the moment there has been, over 20 years worth of evolution to get where we are, 20 years worth of learning from the original ELS, which allowed not necessarily corner cutting, but farmers would, or a lot of farmers would sensibly pick things that they could do that made the most sense for their business, but wouldn't necessarily deliver for nature. The mid-tier scheme, even that we're in now, it does ensure that you have enough things provided so that you are having enough habitats that it does make a difference, but we've gone almost the other way on the bureaucracy scale, so that it makes it so awkward that a lot of farmers don't want to take it up in the first place, and that competitive element also puts quite a lot of farmers off. Having said that, we have put in a lot of information to make sure that there are really good guidelines in there for managing wildflower margins. The cutting and baling of wildflower margins is fantastic for ensuring that they just get better and better year on year. Reducing the cutting of hedgerows to every third year, we know that scales up. I think it's something like 3 times as many berries you'll have on a hedge that is managed on a 2 or 3 year scale compared to every year. The winter bird seed mixes, we know that if you have a diversity of different seeds, it's going to suit lots of different birds. And the timings of establishment, roughly, depending on season, are about right. But there are also things with it that those guidelines have almost been made hard and fast rules. So if I call up the advisor, I think it was Natural England and Nats RPM, I'm not sure who I'm on the phone to be honest, but say, right, we haven't had the rain that we wanted to, can we wait a week because we're going to have the rain in a couple of weeks and we're going to get much better establishment of the seed mix. And I could do, but I wouldn't get the payment anymore. So we just have to put it in and hope for the best. And I think a lot can be learnt there, so that where it's justifiable, where it's recorded perhaps, tweaks to this guideline management can be changed. There is also, on the habitat management side of things, there's loads of information from lots of different conservation organisations. We've developed a farm wildlife 6-point plan for seed provision, wet features, providing seed mixes and looking after boundaries that we know really delivers for nature on arable farmland. And there are different tweaks you can do for upland farms which have their own amazing features that can be nurtured as well. And in the higher tier schemes at the moment, a lot of that is encompassed, which is really good. And in the higher tier schemes, you have that flexibility, and I think that's a really good one to aim for.
Thank you. So the last question that maybe brings us on to is if we wanted to do that everywhere, is there enough money to pay for it, or does more of that activity need to be taken in regulation so that you've got enough money left in the pot to pay for the truly ambitious stuff? I'm not sure who'd like a go on that one. Martin's indicating.
Yeah, as a farmer, there's parts of my landscape that are unproductive to farm. We didn't farm before we had an area-based payment because we didn't farm right to the edge. So there's some parts that I can just leave as a grass margin and manage it in my own way, but there's additionality that I need support with for the pollen and the nectar and the birdseed that's beneficial to the public. And it's how do we blend the two, that's regulation and balance of not needing to farm every acre or every hectare from now on, but where that enforcement should be, because as my business should not impact the wider environment. If I'm affecting the waterways or any other thing, or nutrient loss, that shouldn't be happening. And that where that enforcement should be, and that's, if you're farming that landscape, that's the rule book you play by, and you farm your bit, but not harming the others. So we've got to have a blend of how it works.
Christy.
Yeah, I think the principle is pretty straightforward. Regulations are there to stop people doing bad. Incentives are there to encourage them to do good. And if you apply that approach throughout, then it becomes pretty clear what should get paid for and what not. The only caveat I would say is that we're moving from a very muddled system now, and I think there is a strong justification for some significant short-term investment to help farmers get from the old system to the new system.
So there we have it, solved. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? That question of how long we should be paying for certain things and at what point they become the new normal. We'd like to turn to you guys now for your questions and reflections on what the world should look like. Any immediate reactions or questions for the panel? Sir, if you could introduce yourselves when you...
Williams from West Wales. I work with farmers to prepare damaged soil, and I've done 1,000 detailed soil analysis now with your Bray philosophy. And what has come to me from doing these soil analysis is that they actually telling you the history of what's going on in every field. And so what's come to me is that every field and every farm, and Martin was rightly saying that every farm can be different, but every field and every farm can be different because it's had a different history. So what that tells us is that we need to stop calling agriculture an industry, and particularly farmers need to stop calling it an industry, because this is not an industry. We have to practice at agriculture. And so part of the transition that I think we need to take is to change the wording around agriculture. Let's all start talking about it as a practice, not an industry. Because it's been hijacked by the pharmaceutical industry and the fertilizer industry for their benefit, not for the benefit of soil health, plant health, human health, and animal health.
Thank you. So, Mr. Williams, was it? Mr. Williams was saying that he's got a history of the soils in all of his fields, and that they're all different, and that part of the misconception has been thinking of of agriculture as an industry, and we should think of it as a practice or an art even. What do we think, gang? Is there a change in mindset that moves some of the sort of bottom line focus and turns us back into thinking of this as a way of life and a practice rather than an industry? Martin?
I always refer to myself as an asset manager now. I have a range of assets of different soils, different habitat, biodiversity, and all sorts of sheds and buildings. And each one's different. And that's individual parts of a field now that I can get different outputs in the different soils in the different fields. I'm a business that's trying to generate revenue to keep myself going. And I do different things in different fields to generate that income. The industry and farming talks about output and production, and actually I want to deliver the best for my business of a balance of things, and we need to understand that individuality of what we can do. So I think you're completely right. The language has been about production, output, and the wrong incentives that has not actually helped my farm be profitable and benefit the environment and my production. And how do we move that forward around using better language and encouraging farmers to think differently?
Sir, at the back.
We've just done a management accounting exercise on our farm. We've noticed that in some fields which aren't where it's not great land in particular, an actual countryside stewardship margin is more profitable than the crop. And the gentleman at the front just said there about terminology is a lot of this is about some of the wording that we use. So field margin makes it sound like field's the main thing, this is the worthless edge, when in reality that's worth more than the field in some cases. And so we are calling them wildlife strips. So it's got nothing to do with being the edge of something else. It is a thing in itself. And I think that in psychology and changing mindsets, wording is a thing. So.
I can see eager responses here from people wanting to call them mainstreams or something like that. Chris, then Georgie.
Just a quick observation. I entirely agree. It always seems to be horrendous. We talk about less favoured areas, when what we mean is not very good for farming, but they are brilliant for producing the sort of biodiversity that we talk about. So let's celebrate what the land can do, rather than moaning about what it can't do.
Completely agree with what both of you have said. Other words is, it is a business, and we need to make sure farmers don't feel like we're stopping it being a business, because it is a livelihood, also a service. It is a service for all of the things that we can provide. Then just picking up on what you said about the wildflower strips, they are absolutely an integral part to our business on the farm. We're taking part in a research project that has these wildflower strips going through the middle of the field, and quite a lot of other farmers are doing it as well. And already from the preliminary data, the scientists have come back to us and said they've stuck these plasticine slugs out in a field, which seems bonkers, but they can recognise different bite marks from predatory insects and birds and all sorts. And where we have these wildflower strips, there are higher records of predation and lower records of slugs. And one of the farmers actually noticed within 2 years of having these strips that he could draw back on the amount of slug pellets that he was having to put on the land. So it's using nature and harnessing it. We've worked for so long going to the can, to the inputs that we are sold, and they are working less and less whilst still doing this damage. If we always fight nature, we're always going to lose eventually and probably cause a lot of harm in the process, and it would make much more sense to use the tools of nature to work with it.
I'll just add a quick little bit. I'm really concerned with the journey we're going around SFI, because it's talking about single actions and about bits and pieces. We need a landscape approach and a balanced approach, because it shouldn't be about a margin. It's about which bit of the field we deliver different things. And whether the flowers are on the outside, inside, if there's a pond here or there, it doesn't matter, but that's the best bit to get revenue or do the best thing for the wider landscape on our businesses. And we need to move away from that terminology. But we're all used to it. We've all been living I've been in stewardship for 20 odd years now, and it comes ingrained in you, and it's trying to get that out. And that's what we need, that terminology and language to talk about different things, and that'll help the farmers to think differently.
And these questions, I think, point us towards another one of the huge questions for the future of farming, which is how much private markets come to supplement income versus private markets for ecosystem goods come to supplement income rather than public money. And there's one school of thought that thinks that we should be looking to water companies, major corporations, to be buying environmental assets. We see some good models like Entrade. So is that ever going to be a substitute for public money? Is there a danger that that will drive a race to the bottom on the kinds of environmental products that people sell?
No and no. We've been talking about markets for environmental goods for, 20 years now? And when we talk about it, we just talk about the same examples, Entrade and a couple of others, mainly focused on water companies. I really think if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now, and we should stop distracting ourselves by getting ever more obsessed with these sort of solutions and recognise that if we are really going to turn around nature, we can't rely on the water companies to do much more than we're doing now. It needs to be a combination of regulation and incentives.
The government thinks that there's going to be more private capital coming, I think, and it's part of the plan. So your message is that we can't rely on that flood. We heard a question in the Georgie Eustice session about green bonds. Do you think that's not going to transpire?
If it was going to, I say that there's been no reason why this couldn't have happened in the last 20 years. There's no reason why it hasn't happened in other countries. They've tried to go and do it in Australia and America. They've had some success with things, but it's not delivered at the scale that needs to happen, which is why I think we should stop spending too much time looking at ways for it to incentivise and recognise the scale of the crisis is such that it has to be a combination of regulation and public payment. Others may differ.
I will let the others ponder whether they want to agree with that or not while I search for more hands. Sir?
Do the panel feel that the government has got the ability to change its culture to deal with what we want to do? So I would use Georgie's example of dates. My example today of walking around and finding out I can't use the metal clip-X posts on my fence to do stewardship. Do you feel the government can change that culture, or will get bound in 2024 by another computer system that says no, and when we ring the helpline up and finally get through after 15 minutes, we've dealt with a faceless person that says no? And I say that as both a farmer and as potentially an advisor, that it looks as though, from what Georgie Eustice said this morning, they're very keen to use such as me to do it, but I still will hit that frustration at the end of the day. It just may mean that the farmer isn't getting it, it just made me
Yeah.
get it, if that makes sense.
Thanks. So the question for those who might not have heard it was, will we just have another version of the computer says no in future? And I'd be interested to hear from the panel whether there are ways around that in terms of flexibility from human advice or indeed more information technology approaches that might help you to get a more intelligent version of the computer in the first place. How do we avoid that brick wall?
Are you right,
Georgie first.
I think we're in danger of going two ways. So it could either go down the route of laissez-faire, see what happens, loads of freedom, pay a little bit of money that doesn't make that much difference, both to the farmer's business, but actually crucially to the farming systems. And we need to have that structure from above, giving proper guidance and regulation of where to go. Another danger is that we try and go, well, I think we should go all singing, all dancing, really ambitious, but there isn't the funding and things to go with it. So we end up with a few advisors that are completely overrun, not actually able to give the advice so that a tweak in the dates goes in the right rather than the wrong direction.
And I just think there's ambition within the government to do it, but we've got to realise 24 isn't going to be the open, that's it. And they've got to be a bit honest with us and say, we're grown-ups, this is going to take time to build, we've got to correct the problems as they happen, but we're going to go in that direction and that's what we're going to do. And that's what I want to hear the message from government to say, it's going to be challenging, there will be mistakes, we'll all have computers that say no, but there will be someone human there that can actually... I've had an inspection, I had to wait 2 years for a report to find out any infringements I did. And then, because I hadn't had the report, I did it for a second year, and they want to take 2 lots of money off me. And it's just like, come on, let's put the funding and the infrastructure right back so I can talk to someone and explain the problems or the opportunities and have that flexibility. And just touching back on the markets and public and private finance, it hasn't happened in the past, but I think the opportunity forward, it must happen because there won't be enough from public finance. The private's got to come in. And if I'm holding water on my farm to stop flooding downstream and the insurance company is benefiting from that, how do we make those insurance companies put money into the system that feeds back into the landscape that does it? The government needs to think about who pays and how that framework works. And it's going to be complicated, but we can start that journey and start enforcing some of this so the money flows to get the right actions happening on our landscape.
Thanks, Martin. The flood risk and insurance market is one of the ones that's most often mentioned, and climate and carbon are the other. And certainly lots of the landowning charities are already having people lining up at their doors to say, can we buy your carbon, please? Is that always a good thing?
I'm excited about the carbon, but I'm really worried. Let's get our business and our house in order. I spoke about it yesterday. Let's do what we can first, get our businesses sub-zero, and then look at the carbon opportunity. It's false trading at the moment because I can be the most carbon-emitting business, but I'll trade off the carbon my cover crop and my tree cells. That's wrong in my mind. We need to do our own, get our house in order, and then there will be hopefully future opportunities. But it will be a short window, 20, 30, maybe 40 years if we're at max, because then the other industries have got themselves into net zero positions and that opportunity of trading won't happen. So we can do things, but we need to get our own house in order first, and there will be money opportunities in the future.
Thank you. Georgie, did you want to?
I was just going to say similarly, it's really exciting opportunities, time is limited, but there needs to be that overall structure from government, and I keep going on about it, but we need to have the advice on how to do those practices properly as well. We heard from Georgie Eustice today, no-till, great, I love no-till. Can be done really badly as well. I, hand on heart, can say that at Hope Farm we tried it and we didn't have that knowledge base to start with a few years ago, and it went quite wrong. As Martin knows, we had to do quite a lot of changes afterwards to get to a position now where we think we're heading in the right direction.
Go on, tell us what happened.
Well, heavy clay soils, if you just don't cultivate and then carry on, it gets very compacted, and actually rather than storing that soil, you're pushing the soil all together, you haven't got the air in, and it makes a mess. Yeah. You get one wet winter and it makes a really big mess. Yes, you're not cultivating and you're burning less diesel, but that soil is compacted, not growing crops as well as it should. So you'd require more land to grow the same amount of crops, which again isn't good. But you've also got soil damage at the same time, which is another thing that we need to be working towards to get to a positive future of farming.
Yeah, thank you. It just goes back to the old making sure we're not just going through the motions of something, but actually understanding the implications of an action and getting the good advice. I'll resist the urge to ask for more farm bloopers and maybe try and get two more questions. So I can see one hand at the back and one hand here. Gentleman in the cap first.
We farm on the North Norfolk coast, and we've just signed a literary agreement which takes 60% of our farm out of production should have a sort of a set way of doing things. And I'm just wondering, thinking longer term, what more do colleges need to be doing, what more needs to be done with training from agricultural colleges, but also land management colleges and the conservation sector to sort of bring together the best elements of understanding of biodiversity and managing for wildlife, but also agriculture and managing farming?
Great question, thank you. So just to repeat, what more do we need to do in terms of education through land management colleges and agricultural universities to make sure that the people coming through have a good understanding of how to do ecological land management was question one, and we'll take both at the same time if that's okay. So.
Hi, I work for Wildlife Trust as a farm advisor. As a wildlife trust, we have lots of our own land, nature reserves, about 7,000 acres of grasslands, woodland, heathland, that sort of thing. So we know wildlife habitats very well. But when we speak to farmers, I think we often feel that asking a farmer to have more of this type of habitat on their land is asking quite a lot. Generally speaking, these habitats are not profitable for them unless they happen to be something that is in that little section of stewardship options that pays well. But everything else seems like a burden for a farmer. So how can we reframe our advice to farmers as a positive? Because Martin said what he wants to know is what wildlife does he need on his farm to help him. I'd love to get in that position where I understood how to frame my advice to farmers as a positive rather than feeling that it's a burden.
So another excellent question, which was essentially for a farm advisor from a wildlife charity, at the moment it feels like a big ask to go to a farm and say, please leave some habitat here for the beetles. And the question was, how do advisors turn that from an ask to an offer? So how can it be framed not as, can you do this for us, but how can we help you to improve your business with this wildlife enhancement? So perhaps, Martin, could you start us off on the second question, and then I might come to Chris on the education question and give Georgie free rein afterwards.
Lovely. I think engage with farmers and understand their thinking. Quite often in the past, we've had conservation advisors and conservation groups coming to as farmers, tell us what we should be doing. And that goes down hard because we feel you may not understand the pressures our farming businesses are under. And it's about the win-wins. And it's about what can you offer, where's the financial reward for it, or the lack of cost it would give me a benefit. Because some things, we may be doing things that cost us, and we could do it differently that reduce that cost. And what are the benefits, that bug beetle thing, whatever it is, why does it benefit to my landscape? And why should I have pride of delivering that piece? And it's celebrating the good stuff we deliver and joining that together. But I think it really is for wildlife groups and all conservation advisors is to come and talk to farmers and understand them, because then you talk with us, not at us. And I'm not saying you would do that, but that's what we've felt in the past. Of many of us have, as farmers, have always, if the OSP comes out, they're going to come and bash us because we don't like this or don't like that or any other conservation group. And the opportunity going forward now is let's work together. Let's join this together and actually do the right thing and share some of the costs and find out new opportunities to deliver.
Thanks, Martin. Chris?
Okay, thank you. In response to your question, I entirely agree with Martin. It's about recognising that whatever we might want farmers to do, in the farmer's own mind, they are there to go and run a business. They exist to make a profit for themselves and their family, and that has to be the starting point. But I do think that in recent years there's been a sea change in the attitude of many farmers. I've been working in farming and agricultural policy for quite a long time. And the sort of stuff you're hearing mainstream farmers talking about now, you would never have heard 10 years ago. You never hear Minette give a speech. I mean, it's so different to anything that most of her predecessors would have said. And I think it's a recognition of the direction of travel to a large extent. The referendum was 5 years ago. Farmers have had 5 years to realise that things aren't the same, that they need to start thinking about things in a different way, that they need to go and appraise all of the assets they've got on their farm and think whether some of them can be used for sale through the market, crops, stock, etc., or whether they're natural capital that can be used to lever in public payments. It's that change in mindset, and I think we are getting there. I must say I'm horrified by what you were saying, to hear that's not coming out of agricultural colleges, because you would have thought that they should be the ones that are most alert to the direction of travel and making sure that their students are properly equipped to go out and do what the changing world is moving into. I mean, I won't ask which college they're coming from, but I would be surprised if that was mainstream.
Before I let Georgie come in, just a heads up to the panel for a final quick-fire question after this, which will be, could everybody describe one feature of the farming future that will be different from now? So one thing that would be different. And if Mr. Eustice had stayed and he were here now, what one piece of advice would you give him about the policy needed to get you there? So what's the one feature of the farming future, and what's the one bit of policy change you'd ask for to help us get there? But before that, Georgie, I don't know if you wanted to comment on the particularly the education question.
Yep. So on the education question, there needs to be so much better integration, which I don't think anyone would disagree with. At risk of being shot, I don't think I will be shot down. I did recent agronomy training, and it was so input focused, as in high input. These are the things we've got to learn. These are the chemicals we've got to learn. And a lot less on the soil management aspect. It felt very much like an afterthought. When I was walking the fields with the agronomist a few months ago, we found loads of worm middens in a field, and I got really excited and then had to explain what a worm midden was as like a nest in a field. And that, I don't think that is any fault of the agronomist at all. I think that just shows that we really need to join things up together a little bit better than a lot better than we are now. The conservation advisors, that it would be really useful as well to have a bit more of an integration, so that we've got that crossover of knowledge. RSPB, we're trying to bolster the knowledge so when they come onto a farm, they feel that they can not talk on a level pegging of knowledge, but have a bit more of an in-depth understanding of the rotations, all of the different things going on. I'm not sure if that means that a farmer wants a one-stop shop of one person who knows everything, because that's going to be really hard for that one person. But yeah, just have that better integration across both education systems.
I think we're probably coming to the end of our time.
I won't comment on the other question then as well.
Sorry.
Right.
I'll go from one person to the next for quick fire, although I loved your idea there, which sounded like we need secondments from the RSPB to a farm and backwards, so that everybody learns a bit more. Quick fire, Chris. What's feature of the future and the regulation we need to get us there?
Okay, that didn't sound like your quick fire question when you proposed it earlier on, but okay. In terms of what will change, I think we'll be moving to a much more lower input system for all the reasons we've mentioned, that they'll be too expensive and we'll be concerned about the impact. I also think we'll be moving towards a more collaborative approach, which we haven't touched on. I think that farmers will realise it makes economic sense to start working more together rather than everyone having to have their own John Deere. And that's good for their businesses. It will also be good for nature, because we'll be able to go and deliver at scale. In terms of what government needs to help us do to get there, then basically it's money. Doing what needs to be done to deliver against biodiversity and climate changes is expensive, and that's what I would want George Eustice to be able to go and say to the Treasury if he were here, and indeed willing to do so.
Thanks, Chris. Martin.
So I see my farming business delivering all the aspects public and private want me to deliver. So that's food, biodiversity and various things, meeting the different market needs that I can deliver on my farm and my landscape. But I need the Defra to deliver a vision and a future and a time frame that I need to adjust to, because there are some other things that are coming into play in the next 4 or 5 years that are going to have a drastic effect to my business through net zero, through Cleaner Water, Cleaner Air Acts. And I need to know where that's going to come into a point that I'm going to have to change. So before then, I can adjust my business. And I want that roadmap of what we really need to do, the time frame, and some deadlines that we must do it, so I can get ready for it.
Thanks. And Georgie?
Agree with what to either side of me said, but as well we need better connectivity. That's both in habitats and knowledge, so they're not just isolated pockets trying to fight the way on their own. And on the policy change, I think there needs to stop being a fallback on the current regulation to get the pesticides put through that are now is absolutely fine, and it means it's okay to put these on a wider scale. Neonics have demonstrated that it doesn't always work, so we really need to work to reduce those inputs as much as we can whilst allowing farmers to run a sustainable business.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, just to sum up, we at Wildlife and Countryside Link are hugely excited about the end of the agricultural transition and the future of sustainable farming. We know that when we talk about halting biodiversity loss and achieving net zero, we're asking a huge amount. So thank you for what you're doing already. Come on a journey with us. We would love to hear from you. But today, I hope you'll agree, we've heard some brilliant ideas from our fantastic panel. So thanks again to the panel, and thanks all for coming.